the beast in Revelation 13 and the mark of the beast. You see all sorts of craziness online on this topic, so what is the truth? Let's jump right into it. Chapter 13 says that the first beast has characteristics of a leopard, a bear, a lion, and it has 10 horns. The imagery comes straight out of Daniel 7, where it listed 4 beasts, which is like a lion, a bear, a leopard, and one who had 10 horns. In Daniel, this symbolized 4 pagan empires. In Revelation, all of these characteristics are thrown together into one beast, which indicates that this beast in Revelation is another pagan political empire. And this pagan political empire persecuted the saints. Sounds a lot like what the Roman Empire did to Saint Paul, Saint Peter, and many other Christians. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, the other has yet to come, and when he comes he must remain only a little while. Since ancient times, people interpreted the 7 mountains to be referring to the 7 hills of Rome. That is pretty obvious, so clearly the beast is the political empire of pagan Rome. It says that 5 of the 7 kings have already fallen when John wrote this, meaning that it has to have a 1st century application, confirming that it is indeed the pagan Roman Empire. This means that the 7 kings are interpreted as the 7 Roman emperors that persecuted God's people in the 1st century. Since the beast is said to have blasphemed God, persecuted the saints, ruled the world, and received worship. So if John is referring to 7 Roman emperors of the 1st century, and you keep in mind that the first 5 emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, and that the 7th emperor is described as only reigning a little while, the only option is that it is indeed referring to Otto as the 7th king, because he only reigned for 3 months, which is by far the shortest. So what does this mean? It means that John wrote after the first 5 emperors died, during the time of Nero's successor, Galba, which was between June 68 AD and January 69 AD. And the fact that John ends the chapter by saying that his 1st century audience can actually calculate whose name adds up to the number 666 confirms that this chapter has a 1st century application. He would not tell his 1st century readers that they are capable of deciphering the name if the person he is talking about didn't even exist yet and only came many centuries later. So let's do a quick recap so far. The imagery used indicates that it is a pagan political empire, and John is writing in the 1st century while mentioning that the 6th king is currently reigning in the 1st century, meaning that it has to be the Roman Empire, and this is confirmed by the reference to the 7 mountains, meaning the 7 hills of Rome, and the reference to the 7th king only reigning a very short time is confirmed by the historical data to be Otto. So now with the first beast sorted, we can now move on to verse 11 that speaks about a 2nd beast exercising authority and making people worship the first beast. So the 2nd beast is not the pagan Roman Empire or the emperors, but it is something that leads those to pledge their allegiance to the Roman emperors. There are 2 options put forward for what the 2nd beast might be. Either it is in reference to the custodians of the Roman civil religion, those who deified the Roman emperors, or it is in reference to the Jewish religious authorities. It is self-explanatory why the custodians of emperor worship could be the correct interpretation, since they quite literally made the world worship the emperors. But do not be too quick to dismiss the Jewish religious authorities during the 1st century. You can see the religious leaders being against Christians in the church and accusing them before Roman authorities, and most significantly, in John 19, the chief priest said that they have no king but Caesar. They denied that Jesus is their king. Their statement was so extreme that they left no room for Yahweh to be their king. Their only king was Caesar. So we can see that both the custodians of the Roman civil religion and the Jewish religious authorities fits pretty well with the second beast. If we continue reading Revelation 13, it says that the beast causes people to be marked on their right hand or on their forehead, with people prioritizing this temporal world as it references buying and selling. They do not prioritize eternal life. The mark on someone's hand or forehead is the name of the first beast. The Roman emperors each individually represent the pagan Roman Empire. They are the head after all. The mark is the name of the beast, the name of the man in question, and this man's number is 666. As you might know, Nero Caesar, who reigned from 54 to 68 AD, the value of his name in Hebrew is 666, and Nero's persecution of Christians and the Jewish religious leaders' opposition to the gospel is well known during these times. Now, there is one more thing that is relevant here. Oftentimes, the Old Testament prefigures the New Testament in some way. So the number 666 can give us a valuable insight. The only place in the Old Testament that 666 is mentioned is in connection with King Solomon, who received 666 talents of gold in a single year. It was at this time that Solomon's heart turned away from God and went after the material things of this world, and his heart turned to other gods. So in the Old Testament, there is a connection between 666 and the Jewish king, with the Jewish king focusing on the material goods of this world, turning away from God and turning towards false gods. Now John 19 becomes relevant again. What did the chief priests do? They turned away from Jesus. God was no longer their king. They turned to Caesar. Caesar was in effect their God. So just to summarize this, the religious authorities during these decades were against the gospel. They turned away from God. They turned towards Caesar and the temporal aspects of this world. They turned towards 666, Nero Caesar, representing the pagan Roman Empire, with 666 being connected in the Old Testament to another Jewish figure who turned away from God towards the temporal aspects of this world and paganism. The religious authorities pledged allegiance to the temporal world and to a false god, Caesar. Because of the connection with Solomon, I believe that it is more likely for the second beast to be in reference to the Jewish religious authorities, but I wouldn't dismiss the custodians of the Roman civil religion altogether, because they also fit really well. So if it is possible, I think that both could actually be right. That is where I am leaning. The whole discussion of who the second beast is not as important as who the first beast is or what the mark of the beast is. And this brings us now to the final aspect that we still need to examine, the mark being on the right hand and forehead. Obviously, people did not have their foreheads or hands tattooed with Nero's name or the number 666, so it is not something visible. And you see the same thing concerning other marks in the Bible. God spoke about his laws being a mark on the hand and foreheads of the Israelites. And in Ezekiel, God told an angel to mark the foreheads of the righteous, and the angels also marked the foreheads of God's servants in Revelation 7. These marks are about who you belong to, protection, who you serve. These are invisible, spiritual marks. So when people read the book of Revelation in the first century and read about the mark of the beast being on the right hand and foreheads of people, they are immediately going to recognize that it is an invisible mark, showing who you pledge allegiance to, who you belong to, who you worship. When the Bible speaks about the mark of the beast being on their right hands or foreheads, it is referring to their willingness to employ their heads and hands in service of the emperor, reaping the economic benefits while turning away from God, no longer belonging to God, no longer serving God, no longer obeying God, no longer using your intellect, will, activities, and powers for God. They turned towards the material world and to false gods. That is what the mark of the beast was in the first century. We are now reaching the end of the video, and you might have noticed that I have not talked about any conspiracies like microchips or injections or stuff like that being the mark of the beast. Why? Because chapter 13 is about events in the first century. You might say, okay, But prophecies could be fulfilled more than once, right? Could there technically be a mark of the beast in the future? Well, for it to be a mark of the beast, you need a beast that fits the descriptions found in Revelation again in the future. While that could theoretically happen, it just feels unlikely. But regardless, except for the fact that such speculations are just that, speculative, I struggle to see the point. The mark will remain the same. The mark is essentially a person turning away from God. That is all. Whether you want to call it the mark of the beast or the mark of something else, it is still going to be the same thing. It is still the same sins present for the past 2000 plus years. It was only called the mark of the beast that one time because it was describing a very specific event in history. But it is still the same grave sins. Just don't turn away from God. Follow God and His church. That is all. There is no reason to panic, wondering what is the mark of the beast in the future, assuming it'll happen in the future. It is still the same grave sins. The mark of the beast is not some unique sin never before seen. Of course not. The mark of the beast was just describing a very specific event in history that can be described as people turning away from God to false gods. That same sin has happened thousands of years before and thousands of years after. It is not unique. So when people online make a big deal out of the mark of the beast, that is what you call overhyping something, and that they are probably wrong in whatever they are saying, and that they don't really know what the mark is. And by the way, concerning microchips and other physical things being the mark of the beast, it is entirely inconsistent with what the mark of the beast was in the first century and the biblical idea of spiritual marks. And not only that, it just logically doesn't make any sense. Think about it. If a guy walked down the street, he always tried to do God's will, he is in a state of grace, and if he died right now, he will go to heaven. But then he gets jumped by many other guys. They pin him down to the ground, and despite him trying to resist, they manage to put a microchip in his hand or inject him with something. Now he has the mark of the beast. That doesn't sound very logical to me. This guy didn't turn his back on God. He loves God. But now, due to circumstances out of his control, he has the mark of the beast? Really? Or a baby? Let's say parents give a baby a microchip. So a baby has the mark of the beast. No, this doesn't make sense. It would be something that has to do with free will. You would have to be able to consent. Something physical, like a microchip, can in principle always be exploited and violate someone's free will. So there is no way something like that could ever be the mark of the beast. And on that note, we end today's video. I hope you found this informative. Remember to like and subscribe, or, don't. You have free will. Well, until I design a microchip and make the whole world digest it, so they can subscribe to me and serve me forever and ever and ever. Oh, is this thing still recording? That was just a joke. Phew, that should cover my tracks for now.